Hi students, now we're going to combine the horizontal and vertical at the same time. And we're going to build them the same way that we've been building these for the last few things. All right, so first things first, I'm going to set up my midline. And my midline is going to be at y equals 3. So I'm going to go there on my graph, 1, 2, 3, and go straight across. All right, second thing, I'm going to use my amplitude, and that's going to come from the beginning. That's going to be at a height of 2, so I'm going to go 2 above the midline and do a line across, 2 below the midline and do a line across. That gives me a pretty good idea of where this graph is going to be. The other thing that's really important right now is for us to identify, is this positive or negative? It's positive. And is it sine or cosine? This one's cosine, so I know that my graph is going to look like this. So I'm going to call this the positive cosine graph. Okay, now we're going to do this stuff with our x-coordinates. And to do that, I'm going to say 1/2. I'm going to label this first so we have that information. 3, I'm going to call this the x stuff. This combines finding the period and finding the phase shift in 1. And we're going to start with 1/2 x minus pi over 8 is equal to 0. And then we're going to end, I'll do this color-coded as well, 1/2 x minus pi over 8 is equal to 2 pi. I'd like you to notice this is exactly the same thing we did in the previous thing when we're just doing horizontal stuff. All right, I'm going to add pi over 8 to the other side. We get 1/2 x is equal to pi over 8. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of the 1/2. And that gets me x is equal to 2 over 8, which is pi over 4. All right, I'm going to look on here for that place. So we go up to 2 pi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Takes 8 pieces to get there. It means pi is going to be in the middle. And pi over 4 would be that very first tick mark. Since we're cosine, we're starting at the top. So my first point would be at pi over 4, and that has a y value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To get my end point, we're doing the same thing. I notice that this is going to be in pi's over 8. So I feel like it may be helpful if I were to write 2 pi as a thing of 8 on the bottom. So to make 2 pi with an 8 on the bottom, I'm going to multiply both top and bottom by 8 to get 16 pi over 8. Okay, now when I add pi over 8 to the other side, we've got 1/2 x. And when I add that, 1 plus 16 is 17 pi over 8. Now to finish this up, I'm going to multiply by 2. And when I cross cancel, that makes that a 4 in the bottom. So this is going to be 17 pi over 4. All right, that's kind of crazy because that's like 4 and then 1 beyond that. So here's my 4. And then 1 tick mark beyond that is 17 pi over 4. Cosine ends at the top again. So there's my end point. That's at 17 pi over 4, comma 5 again. All right, exactly in between these two, and I can do this with counting or I can do this with some arithmetic. We've got pi over 4, so I'm going to do the middle. Pi over 4 plus 17 pi over 4, whatever that is, divided by 2. And when we do that, we got 18 divided by 4, divided by 2, that's going to be 9 pi over 4. That's going to be just at 2 pi and then a little bit. We know cosine, the middle point is at the bottom, so that's going to be on my bottom bar there. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to go exactly in the middle of those two. Between pi over 4 and 9 pi over 4 is going to be 5 pi over 4. That's a middle point. And between 9 and 17 is going to end up being 13 pi over 4. There's 3 pi. And that's going to be right there. My graph shape is going to look like this. Okay. I wanted to start with a hard one for this in terms of having all of these transformations at once to show that it's going to be the same thing every single time that we do this. Most of the ones that we do together, do in class, are going to be more simple than this, but I wanted to make sure that we had this as kind of a baseline so we know what we're doing every time. And in truth, I think what makes this one especially difficult is fractions. And having to deal with fractions is something that we just kind of need to work with. Looking at our second one, we're doing the same thing. Midline first. And this time it's going to be y equals 0 because there's nothing at the end. Cool. Positive sine graph. So based on my midline, my positive sine graph should look like this. We're also given that mother function, so we have that as a nice support for that. Then we're looking at our amplitude. That's going to be a half. So from my midline, which I didn't actually mark on here because it was there, but I will mark it. There's my midline. My amplitude is going to be up a half and down a half. So we've got our boundaries there. Okay. Let's find start and end points. So my starting point, we've got 2 theta minus pi over 2 is equal to 0. I'm going to add pi over 2 to the other side. So we got 2 theta is equal to pi over 2. And then we're going to divide by 2. That's going to give us theta. And if I cut a half in half, that's going to be a fourth. So pi over 4 is going to be my starting point. For sine, that's going to be on the midline. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're cut into pi over 4 already. Here's my starting point. For the ending point, same thing. 2 theta minus pi over 2 is equal to 2 pi. I'm going to, again, 2 pi, I'm going to write in terms of pi over 2 because I'm going to have to add that in a second. And 2 pi is the same as 4 pi divided by 2. That's just getting me a common denominator ahead of time so that when I add pi over 2 to both sides, we end up with 2 theta is equal to 5 pi over 2. Okay, 5 pi over 2. Now I've got to divide by 2 or multiply by a half, which actually I find a lot easier. And 5 times 1 over 2 times 2, we get 5 pi over 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to get me to 5 pi over 4. All right. Let's get that middle point. That's exactly between these two. I can do that visually. And that's going to be at 3 pi over 4. Because that's exactly between those 2 points. If you wanted to get the x value, you could do pi over 4 plus 5 pi over 4. I like how I wrote a 2 there. And then divide by 2. That's going to be 6 pi over 4, which is 3 halves, times a half would be 3/4. The top and the bottom are going to be right between those two. Here's my top point, here's my bottom point, and a nice smooth curve. All right, looking at our next one, we're going to do the same thing. My midline is going to be at -3. So 1, 2, 3. My amplitude is going to be 2. So I'm going to go 2 up from there and 2 down from there. And then again, I want to look at this. This is negative sine. So for negative sine, where my sine graph would normally look like that. For negative sine, we're doing the same thing, but upside down. So our graph is going to look like this. All right, let's get our start and end points. Inside is 4 theta minus pi, that equals 0. I'm going to add pi to the other side, divide by 4, and I get pi over 4 as a starting point. This is divided for us nice already. Here's my starting point. For the ending point, same thing. 4 theta minus pi is equal to 2 pi. I'm going to add pi. That gets me 4 theta is 3 pi. If I divide by 4, we end up getting 3 pi over 4. That's going to be right here. We've got to go exactly in the middle of those two. I'm just going to call this other points now. Hopefully we're getting a little bit used to that. So exactly in the middle is going to be on the midline as well. That's that point there. And then for the top and bottom points, again, we're going down first. Exactly between those two is the bottom. Exactly between those two is the top. My graph is going to look something like this. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to start with our midline. And that's going to be at positive 1. So I'm going to sketch that first. All right. Then we're going to have our amplitude. That's going to be 5. And the basic graph shape for this is going to be negative cosine. We know cosine normally would start at the top. Negative cosine was going to start at the bottom and end back at the bottom. So we want our graph to look roughly like that. Okay, and then 5 up and 5 down from there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the top of my graph. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the bottom of my graph. All right, let's do my start and end points. Starting point, we got 2x minus pi over 3 is equal to 0. I'm going to add pi over 3 to the other side, divide by 2. And that ends up getting me, I'll show that just so that we don't end up with confusion. Dividing by 2, multiplying by half, same thing. And we end up getting pi over 6. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is already cut up into 6 pieces for us, which is really helpful. All right, end point, same thing. 2x minus pi over 3 is going to be equal to 2 pi. I'm going to put this in terms of 3 as the denominator. So that should be 6 pi over 3. In solving this, I'm going to add pi over 3 to the other side. We get 7 pi over 3 times a half. We end up getting x is equal to 7 pi over 6. That's going to end up being right here for us. And I like that I drew both of those points and totally screwed it up because that is though we were doing sine and we are not. We're looking at cosine here. So let me redraw those 2 points where cosine, for our purposes, is going to start at the bottom because it's a negative cosine. So at pi over 6, that's there. And for the second point, that's going to be at the bottom as well. I'm going to go exactly between those two, between pi over 6 and 7 pi over 6 is going to be 4 pi over 6. That's going to end up right about here. That wasn't supposed to be erased. There we go. And at the top of our drawing, exactly in the middle of those two, we're going to end up on the midline, and exactly in the middle of those two, we're going to end up on the midline again, giving us this beautiful smooth curve that connects those points. We can also go backwards with this, and for this, I'm going to do the same type of process, but a little bit in reverse. We're going to make an assumption here. I guess we don't have to. There's negative 2. here is the origin, just so we can kind of see that clearly. It was a little bit hard for me to see. My midline, I'd like us to notice, is right here at y equals 1. So whatever we end up with is plus 1 on the end. My amplitude, and I'm going to do a cosine graph because I find that easier for us to work with. So I'm going to go from peak to peak. The amplitude is going to be, it looks like going from a midline of 1 to a height of 2. That's going to be 1, and again, I chose this as positive cosine. So now we can kind of look at the inside of this stuff. So inside, we're going to have an equation that looks like a b and then an x minus c. We talked about both of those points previously, but not really together. So b, we said, was related to the period, and we said that 2 pi was equal to b multiplied by the period. If I take a look at this, and scale-wise, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, each line is pi over 6. My period starts at negative pi over 6, and it looks like it goes all the way up until 11 pi over 6, if I'm counting. So in looking at this, the period for that is going to be 2 pi, because if I do pi over, 11 pi over 6 minus negative 1 pi over 6, we get 12 pi over 6, which is 2 pi. So if that's our period, then b in this case is going to be 1. And then our phase shift point, if we are starting at negative pi over 6, that means we are shifted 1 unit left, pi over 6 units to the left, and that's going to be plus pi over 6 on the inside there. All right. One more of these doing the same thing. My midline, if I got to be real careful here because that's counting down to negative 12, that means that each of these 3 lines is going to be 4. So midline's at negative 8. My amplitude going from there to the top, so that's 1 tick mark here. That's going to be an amplitude of 4. And just to make things a little bit easy on myself, I'm going to choose this as a cosine function. So I'm going to look from here to here so I can see those 2 peaks pretty easily. You don't have to use this. You can choose any full cycle that you would like. Here we're going from pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2. When I subtract those two, we end up getting 2 pi over 2, which is pi. That's my period. And we know that based on the same equation we've been using the whole time, 2 pi is the b times the period. And based on what we just figured out, b is going to be 2. So then finally we got to figure out a phase shift. Here is my origin, and we have, based on what we chose, shifted right pi over 2 from where we were going to start before. So one way for us to deal with this in terms of our graph would be to say that this is x plus pi over 2. My b value is going to go out in front of that, so 2. We decided this was going to be a positive cosine graph because those are the easiest ones for us to write equations for. We said that the amplitude was 4 and that the midline was minus 8. At this point, that equation is done.